Dog blocks the path and stops his owner from getting married, but when she found out why, she broke down crying. Claire's house was buzzing with activity, almost like a pre-wedding party. People were coming and going non-stop, decoration boxes were scattered across the floor, pieces of fabric, flowers, plates, and a white dress hung carefully in the living room, as if it were waiting for its moment to shine on the most special day. Claire, her eyes sparkling, was in the middle of it all, trying to organize every detail and smiling endlessly. She could hardly believe her big day was so close. But amid all that joy, something was bothering Claire. It wasn't the bouquet that hadn't arrived yet or the invitation someone had forgotten to send. It was Maxim, her 13-year-old German shepherd, who seemed different. Maxim had always been more than just a dog to Claire. He had been by her side during the toughest times when everything seemed to fall apart and she felt completely alone. Max was there. He was the friend who made her laugh when she wanted to cry, the companion who instinctively knew when to lie at her feet, asking for nothing, just being there. He was Claire's anchor. But in recent days, Maxim had been acting strange. Quiet. Observant. Always lying in the same corner, his eyes following her every move, as if he were trying to say something. At first, Claire tried to dismiss it. It's just his age, she thought. After all, Maxim was already elderly in dog years. Maybe he was tired or simply confused by all the commotion in the house. But deep down, something in Claire told her it was more than that. Max's eyes weren't just tired. They were filled with something deeper, something urgent, something she couldn't decipher. As Claire adjusted a bow on a bridesmaid's dress, she noticed Maxim lying in the corner of the room, his head resting on his paws. He looked sad. Not like a bored dog, but like someone who sensed something important was about to happen, and no one else noticed. Claire paused what she was doing and approached him. She knelt down, stroked his head, and Maxim lifted his eyes to meet hers. His gaze was full of love, but there was also something Claire couldn't understand, as if he were asking for help. "Are you okay, my love?" she whispered, gently stroking his ears. Maxim sighed but didn't move. Claire felt a pang in her chest, but before she could think more about it, someone called her from across the room. She gave him one last kiss on the head and stood up, returning to the whirlwind of wedding preparations. In the days leading up to the big moment, Claire couldn't ignore how Maxim became increasingly introspective. He still tried to follow her around the house, but his breathing seemed heavier, his steps slower. At night, when she finally went to bed, Maxim would struggle to climb up and lie beside her, as he had done since he was a puppy. But even there, Claire sensed something was different. Deep down, she knew Maxim was more than just a dog. He had a connection with her that went beyond words. He always knew when something was wrong with her, when she needed comfort or just quiet company. But now, Claire felt the roles had reversed. He was the one who needed her. And even though she didn't know exactly what was happening, Claire felt she needed to stay attentive. Something told her Maxim still had an important role to play in her life, even if she didn't understand it yet. And so, the days continued, filled with laughter and preparations. But in the corner of the room, watching everything, was Maxim, with that gaze that seemed to peer straight into Claire's soul. If she had known what was coming, perhaps she would have dropped everything to listen to him at that moment. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you love animals and their heartwarming stories. The big day finally arrived. Claire was radiant in her wedding dress, making last-minute adjustments before the ceremony. The garden, adorned with white flowers and delicate lights, looked like something out of a fairy tale. All eyes were on her as the photographer gave instructions. "Just a step to the side, Claire. Now look this way, perfect," he said as he clicked away. Maxim was there too, lying close to Claire, as he always did. At first glance, he seemed calm, but his eyes never left her. And then, something happened that no one expected. As Claire moved to strike another pose, Max got up suddenly. With slow but firm steps, he positioned himself directly in front of her, as if to block her path. It was a strange sight, a 13-year-old German shepherd, visibly aged, standing firmly in front of the bride, looking directly into her eyes, as if trying to convey something incredibly important. "Max, what is it, my love?" Claire asked, bending down to stroke him. But Max didn't budge. He just kept looking at her, his breathing heavier than usual, and let out a low whine, almost like a lament. Claire felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't like Max to act this way, especially not during such a busy moment. The people around laughed, finding the situation amusing. "Oh, he just wants attention," someone commented. "Let him be part of the photos," another joked. But Claire knew this wasn't a bid for attention. Maxim had never acted like this before. He was a calm dog who respected boundaries, but now he seemed desperate to be noticed. She knelt down again, this time more carefully, and noticed his breathing was labored, more than it should have been for a dog just lying down. She touched his chest and felt his heart beating rapidly, irregularly. Maxim looked at her with such intensity that she felt tears well up in her eyes. "Claire, are we going to continue? The guests are waiting," someone called out in the background. But she barely heard them. Everything around her seemed to fade away, and the only sound she could focus on was Max's heavy breathing and her own heart pounding faster. "No, something's wrong," she said, standing up. "I can't go on without knowing what's happening to him." The room fell silent, unable to grasp Claire's reaction. After all, it was her wedding day. But she knew that if she ignored that moment, something inside her would never forgive her. Maxim wasn't just a dog, he was part of her soul, and she knew he was trying to warn her about something important. "We're going to the vet now," she said, looking at Michel, who was nearby. He saw the seriousness in her eyes and didn't question it. "I'll go with you," he replied, holding her hand. As Claire guided Maxim to the car, it felt like she was leaving everything behind: the dress, the flowers, the party. But deep down, none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was Maximum. He had saved her so many times with his presence, and now it was her turn to do the same for him. She didn't yet know what was wrong, but she knew she had made the right choice. And deep down, Maxim seemed to know too. He looked at her one last time before getting into the car, with an expression that said it all: "Thank you." Claire sat in the car, her wedding dress bunched around her, holding Maxim tightly in her arms. The silence was heavy, broken only by Max's labored breathing and the sound of the engine. Michel drove beside her, gripping the wheel tightly. He glanced at Claire but said nothing. He knew words wouldn't suffice at that moment. When they arrived at the veterinary clinic, Claire barely waited for the car to come to a complete stop before rushing out with Max in her arms. It was as if all the sparkle and joy of the day had vanished. What had been the most anticipated day of her life now felt like a whirlwind of uncertainty and fear. The clinic receptionist stared at Claire, wide-eyed, clearly surprised to see a bride walking through the door carrying an elderly German shepherd. "Please, he's not well," Claire said, almost out of breath. It didn't matter that her makeup was flawless or that she was wearing the dress of her dreams. At that moment, nothing mattered except Max. They were seen quickly. While the vet conducted the initial exams, Claire sat in a chair in the waiting room, her hands trembling. Michel was beside her, silent, just holding her hand. A few friends who had followed the couple to the clinic tried to understand what was happening. "Are you sure about this, Claire? The guests are all waiting. Maybe we can go back after this is sorted out," one of them suggested. But she shook her head, resolute. "I can't go on as if nothing's happening," she said, her eyes fixed on the door Maxim had been taken through. "This wedding only makes sense if he's with me. He's always been there for me. I'm not going to abandon him now." As the minutes ticked by, Claire mentally replayed every moment she had shared with Maximum. From the day she adopted him as a puppy to the nights he slept at the foot of her bed during times when she felt like her whole world had collapsed. Maxim wasn't just a dog. He was family. And family doesn't get left behind. Finally, the vet returned to the room with a serious expression. Claire stood up immediately, her heart racing. "He's stable for now, but we need more tests to understand exactly what's happening," the vet explained. "You made the right decision to bring him in. He needs care." Claire felt a momentary relief but also a lump in her throat. She looked at Michel, who gave her a faint smile, trying to reassure her. "We're here together, Claire. We'll get through this." At that moment, she realized she had made the right choice. It didn't matter what others thought or the ceremony that had been interrupted. The love she felt for Maxim was non-negotiable, and being by his side at that moment was all she could do. As she stroked Maxim, now calmer in a nearby room, she whispered, "I promise I'll take care of you, no matter what." And Maxim, even weak, wagged his tail gently, as if to say he understood that Claire would never abandon him. The vet called Claire and Michel into a private room. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the air inside was denser. Claire gripped Michel's hand so tightly her fingers were turning white, while her eyes searched the doctor's face for any hint of hope that everything would be okay. But deep down, she already knew it wouldn't be an easy conversation. "Claire, Maxim has early-stage heart failure. His heart isn't functioning as it should, which is putting a strain on his entire body," the vet explained in a calm but serious tone. "We can help him feel better with medication and specific care, but his time is limited." Those last words hit Claire like a punch to the stomach. She felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, and the tears came before she could stop them. "Limited?" she repeated, as if refusing to believe it. "How much time?" "It's hard to say. With the right care, he could have a few months of quality life. But it's important to understand that he's already in a delicate stage." Claire looked at Michel, who also seemed shaken but was trying to be the rock she needed at that moment. She felt his hand tighten around hers, a silent gesture of support. Maxim, lying on the table beside them, seemed calmer now, but his eyes were fixed on Claire, as if he could feel her sadness. He was an old dog, yes, but he had always been a fighter. And now, it was as if he were telling her, "I'm still here." "Is he in pain?" Claire asked, her voice trembling. "Right now, he's uncomfortable, but not in extreme pain. With treatment, we can help him feel more comfortable. However, it's crucial that you stay attentive to any signs that he's not doing well." Claire moved closer to Maxim, gently stroking his head. "Did you hear that, my friend? We're going to take care of you. I promise we'll do everything to make you feel better." Tears streamed down her face, but her voice was steady. She wasn't going to give up on him. Not now, not after everything he meant to her. The ride home was silent. Claire, still in her wedding dress, sat in the back seat with Maxim, holding him in her arms as if he were the most precious thing in the world. Michel drove carefully, saying nothing, but glancing in the rearview mirror every so often to check on Claire. When they arrived home, Claire felt the weight of everything that had happened. The wedding, which was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, had been completely turned upside down. But in her heart, she knew there was no other choice. Maxim was her priority now. He had stood by her through the hardest moments, and now it was her turn to repay that love and loyalty. As she settled Maxim into his favorite bed, surrounded by the toys he loved so much, Claire whispered, "I don't know how much time we have, but I promise I'll make every second count." Maxim, though tired, wagged his tail slowly, as if to say, "I trust you." And in that moment, Claire realized that the true meaning of love wasn't in grand ceremonies or elaborate parties, but in being there for those who truly mattered, even in the hardest times. Maxim had taught her that, and now it was her turn to be the strength he needed. Claire never imagined her wedding day would end in a veterinary clinic's waiting room, with people staring at her wedding dress in confusion. It was as if all the sparkle and glamour she had dreamed of had vanished, replaced by something far simpler but infinitely more real. Maxim lay there on an improvised blanket, breathing heavily but with his eyes fixed on her. And in that gaze, Claire found the answer to the most difficult decision she had ever made. As she held Max's paw, Michel's phone buzzed. It was Claire's mother, asking what they were going to do next. "We can't leave things like this. Our friends and family are waiting. And you too deserve to experience this moment," she said. Michel looked at Claire, and she saw that he had an idea. "What if we have the ceremony here?" Michel suggested, with a half-smile. "Here? At the clinic?" Claire asked, surprised. "Why not? What matters is that we're together. And Max is here. He's part of our family. It doesn't make sense to go on without him." Claire was silent for a few seconds, letting the idea sink in. It was completely crazy, but at the same time, it made perfect sense. She looked at Maxim and felt a wave of emotion wash over her. He had been with her through so much, and there was nothing more important at that moment than having him there when she said, "I do." Michel picked up the phone and started organizing everything. He called friends and family, explaining the situation, and surprisingly, no one hesitated to adjust their plans. Within an hour, the clinic's parking lot was filled with guests still dressed for a luxurious wedding, but smiling, knowing this moment would be unforgettable. Meanwhile, Claire, with the help of one of the clinic's nurses, adjusted her dress and wiped her tear-filled eyes. She looked at herself in a small bathroom mirror and smiled. It wasn't the wedding she had planned, but it was exactly the wedding her heart needed. In the waiting room, chairs were moved aside to create space. A small altar was improvised with a table covered by a white sheet, and Michel, already standing, waited for Claire with a look that said everything: love, understanding, and the promise that they would face anything together. When Claire walked into the room, with Maxim slowly walking beside her, a reverent silence filled the space. There was no music, but the moment was so full of emotion that no one seemed to notice. Maxim, despite his exhaustion, raised his head as if he understood the significance of the moment. He lay down beside Michel, as if giving his blessing to the union about to take place. "We are here today to celebrate love," began their friend, who had taken on the role of officiant, "and to remember that true love is about being there in the most unexpected and challenging moments." Claire and Michel exchanged simple but deeply meaningful vows. They promised to stand by each other not only in joy but also in challenges, just like the one they were facing. When they said, "I do," a wave of applause and tears filled the room. Maxim, as if sensing the mood, wagged his tail slowly, bringing smiles to everyone. It was an unlikely wedding, with no pomp or luxury, but it was absolutely perfect. Claire looked at Maxim and whispered, "You are the reason for all of this. Thank you for being with me." And at that moment, she knew that even though his time might be limited, he had given her the greatest gift of all, the understanding of what truly mattered. After that day at the vet, everything changed in Claire and Michel's lives. The grand honeymoon plans were set aside, and Maxim became their top priority. He was the heart of their family, and every moment with him now held immeasurable value. The household routine was completely adapted to Maxim's needs. He now had a soft bed next to the couch, his meals were prepared with extra care, and his medications were given lovingly. Claire became an expert in schedules and care, and Michel was always by her side, helping with everything. More than ever, Maxim was the center of their attention. But it wasn't just about medical care. Claire wanted Maxim to feel that, even with his limitations, there was still room for joy. On the days when he felt better, Claire and Michel took him to the park. Max didn't run like he used to, but he loved lying on the grass, feeling the sun on his fur, and watching other dogs play in the distance. He wagged his tail, content, as if to say, "I'm still here." The nights were different too. Maxim used to sleep at the foot of the bed, but now Claire made sure he was right by her side. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would wake up and hear his calm breathing. She'd reach out to stroke his head, feeling that familiar warmth, and think, "We still have today. And that's enough." Michel also found ways to include Maxim in every possible moment. They watched movies together in the living room, with Max lying between them. Claire made sure to include Max in meals, setting aside a small piece of meat just for him. It was as if their entire lives had been rearranged to ensure Maxim felt the love he had always given, but multiplied. Of course, there were hard days. Maxim had moments of extreme exhaustion, when even standing up seemed like an effort. Claire cried silently, trying to stay strong in front of him. But even on those days, he would look at her with those deep eyes, as if to say, "I'm okay as long as you're here." One of the most special moments happened one evening when Claire and Michel decided to throw a small garden party just for Maxim. Close friends and family brought cakes and flowers, but all the attention was on him. Maxim was given a special dog-friendly cake, new toys, and countless hugs. He seemed to understand that it was all for him, and even though he was tired, he wagged his tail happily. For Claire, those months were an emotional roller coaster. On one hand, there was the constant pain of knowing she was saying goodbye. On the other, there was immense gratitude for every moment with Maxim. She realized that life isn't about how much time we have, but about how we choose to live that time. And with Max, every day was a gift. Michelle, ever attentive, once said, "You know we're learning more from him than he is from us, right?" Claire laughed, but she knew it was true. Maxim was teaching them what true love, patience, and resilience meant. And so, they lived those months as a long farewell but also a celebration of Maxim's life. Claire knew the end was near, but she also knew that when it came, Max would leave surrounded by love, just as he had lived. It was a quiet morning. The sun had barely risen, and Claire sat beside Maxim, who was resting in his favorite bed, surrounded by his toys and blankets. She gently held his paw as Michelle brought her a cup of tea and sat next to her. They both knew the moment was approaching, but that didn't make it any easier. Maxim seemed more tired than ever. His breathing was slow and weak, but his eyes still sparkled, as if to say, "I'm okay. You gave me everything I needed." Claire felt a lump in her throat, trying to hold back the tears. She knew Maxim hated seeing her sad, so she tried to stay calm, even though she was falling apart inside. She began talking to him, as she had done since he was a puppy. "Do you remember the day I brought you home, Max? You were so small you could fit in my arms. I thought I'd never be able to take care of you, but look, you took care of me. You were always by my side, even on the hardest days. Now it's my turn to be here for you." Michel, who was usually more reserved with his emotions, couldn't hold back his tears. He stroked Maxim's head and whispered, "You were the best friend anyone could ever have. Thank you for everything, Maximum. You made our lives so much better." Maxim, even in his weakness, wagged his tail slowly, as if he understood every word. He didn't need to speak, his gaze said it all. He was at peace. He knew he was loved, that his life was filled with happy moments, and that he had fulfilled his purpose. Time seemed to stand still that morning. Claire and Michel stayed by Maxim's side, not saying much, simply sharing that moment with him. It was as if the entire world had gone silent, allowing Maxim to leave surrounded by love and gratitude. When he finally took his last breath, it was peaceful, as though he was surrendering to rest after a long and beautiful journey. Claire rested her head on his chest, feeling that his heart had stopped, and finally let her tears fall. She cried like she never had before, but at the same time, she felt a strange sense of relief. Maxim was no longer suffering. He had passed away at home, surrounded by those who loved him most. Michel held Claire tightly, and the two of them stayed there, sharing the silence and the pain of loss. They knew that moment would never be forgotten. Maxim wasn't just a dog, he was part of their souls, a bond that would never be broken. After a while, Claire stood up, still holding Maxim's paw. "I promised you I'd make every moment count. I hope you felt how much we loved you," she said, looking at him with tears still in her eyes. She knew he would understand, wherever he was. Later that day, Claire and Michel buried Maxim in the garden, beneath the shade of a large tree he had always loved. They placed a small plaque with the inscription, "Here rests Maxim, the best friend we could ever have. Forever in our hearts." And so, Maxim was gone, but he left behind something that could never be taken away, the memories of pure, unconditional love. Claire knew the pain of losing him would never fully fade, but she also knew the gratitude of having had Maxim in her life was greater than any sadness. He was gone, but his legacy would live on in every act of love and every happy memory he had left behind. The void Maxim left was immense. Every corner of the house felt quieter, and Claire still woke up at night, reaching out to where Max used to sleep. He was no longer there, but the feeling of his presence was almost tangible. She knew mourning was part of the process, but some days the longing felt unbearable. Michel tried to cheer her up, suggesting outings, dinners, or simply holding her hand in silence when the tears wouldn't stop. But they both knew only time could ease the pain. Even so, there was something they shared, the certainty that Maxim had changed their lives forever. One day, a few weeks later, Claire came across a photo of Maxim on her phone. He was wagging his tail in the middle of one of his favorite games in the garden. The image brought tears to her eyes, but also a smile. That's when she said, "I feel like Max would want us to do something for other dogs. He was always so generous, so full of love." Michel agreed immediately. Let's go to the shelter. Who knows? Maybe we'll find someone who needs us, just as much as we needed Maxima. At the local shelter, the air was filled with barks and soft whines from the dogs. Among them was an elderly Labrador named Louis. He lay in a corner, his gaze tired but full of hope. His fur showed signs of age, and his records revealed he had been abandoned when his owner could no longer care for him. Claire felt an instant connection. Louis reminded her of Maxim, not in appearance, but in his eyes. It was as if he were saying, "I'm ready to love you, if you're ready to give me a chance." Without a second thought, Claire and Michel decided to adopt him. Louis's first night at their home was filled with discoveries. He was shy but slowly began exploring the spaces. When he found the bed that had once been Maxim's, he lay down with a deep sigh, as if he had finally found home. Claire felt her heart tighten but also a new sense of joy. It was as if Maxim had guided this moment, making it clear that love never runs out, it just finds new ways to exist. The months that followed were filled with special moments with Louis. He was a calm and gentle dog who seemed to be grateful for every act of kindness. Claire and Michel realized that even with hearts scarred by loss, there was room to welcome and love again. It wasn't about replacing Maxim, that would never be possible. It was about honoring his legacy by offering love to someone who needed it most. Over time, Claire began reflecting on everything Maxim had taught her and Michel. He showed them that true love isn't about grand gestures but about being there during the hardest times. He taught them that sacrifice and dedication are part of any relationship worth having. Maxim showed that even when time is short, the impact can be eternal. Maxim prepared us for this, Claire said one day, watching Louis nap in the sun. He taught us that love isn't measured by time, but by the quality of the moments we share. Michel smiled and replied, and he also showed us that love never ends. It just finds new paths. With Louis by their side, Claire and Michel discovered that the heart has an infinite capacity to love, even when it's been hurt. And, in a way, Maxim remained present in every decision they made, every act of care, and every new moment shared with Louis. This is how they came to understand that Maxim's true legacy wasn't just the longing he left behind, but the profound lessons about love, sacrifice, and the ability to open one's heart again, even after pain. And with Louis, they were ready to continue this story of love that began long ago with a special German Shepherd who would never be forgotten. Thank you for watching the video until the end. Remember to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts about this story in the comments.